Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And welcome to Glasgow and to COP26 and to this panel on delivering Jet Zero. Well, everybody, achieving net zero aviation emissions by 2050, or Jet Zero, as we call it, is a difficult but necessary and important challenge. Now, last month, the UK government published its net zero strategy. This is outlining the action that's required to keep us on our path to net zero. And we've been delighted to see many other countries following with setting out their own ambitious plans. The UK government is absolutely clear that the aviation sector has a really important, significant part to play in meeting our carbon reduction targets. And this is despite what has arguably been the hardest year and a half in its history. Pre-pandemic, demand was projected to increase, with 435 million UK passengers expected to take to the skies by 2050. No wonder the international aviation sector could become one of the highest residual emitting sectors by 2050. And that is why the UK government is committed to Jet Zero, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's how we secure the future of this critically important sector. And let me outline, if I may, just a few areas where the government is driving change. For example, the government is providing £180 million for the development of UK Sustainable Aviation Fuel, SAF, production, on top of our previous advanced fuels funding competitions. Earlier this year, we set out and carried out a full consultation on what our Jet Zero strategy would mean, outlining the UK government's comprehensive approach to decarbonising the aviation sector. This will ultimately help shape our final Jet Zero strategy, which is due to be published early next year. Now, for a challenge of this scale, we are absolutely clear that government can't and won't achieve success by acting alone. That's why the Jet Zero Council is such a vital forum. It brings together senior leaders in government, aviation, aerospace, and academia. It looks to establish the UK's production facilities for sustainable aviation fuels, to industrialise clean aviation technology, to provide a supportive regulatory framework, and ultimately to achieve the first ever zero-emission transatlantic flight. And there are already so many examples of bold new endeavours across government and industry. On the 14th of September, British Airways flew their first SAF flight from London to Glasgow, powered on a blend of 35% sustainable aviation fuel. This reduced emissions by 62% compared to a flight on the same route a decade ago. We've also seen Rolls-Royce push the boundaries of aviation with its all-electric Spirit of Innovation aircraft, which took to the skies for the first time on the 15th of September. And the work of the UK government's backed Fly Zero project recently identified liquid hydrogen in offering the most potential for enabling zero-emission flight. These successes are setting us on a pathway to Jet Zero. And I'm pleased to say they are aligned both to Sustainable Aviation's world-first roadmap and the UK government's own Jet Zero consultation. And on that note, I'd like to thank the Sustainable Aviation team for all of their efforts in making this important panel happen today. And I'd also like to thank the Jet Zero Council CEO, Emma Gilthorpe, who will chair today's event. But to kick-start today's session, I am honoured to introduce our keynote speaker, Baroness Brown of the UK's Climate Change Committee and Jet Zero Council Advisor. Baroness Brown, thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And as the Minister has commented to us, I'm really proud that the UK is the first country to have a net zero strategy, a comprehensive strategy across all key sectors that shows how we intend to achieve the critical target of net zero by 2050. And of course, within this, we have the transport decarbonisation strategy with some excellent proposals, such as the 2040 net zero target for domestic aviation. In accepting the Climate Change Committee's proposals for the 6th carbon budget earlier this year, the government took the hugely important step of including international aviation emissions in our 6th carbon budget for 2035 and in our net zero target for 2050. So we've had lots of important positive commitments. The CCC's analysis and the government's strategy for aviation decarbonisation share a very similar high ambition scenario, which gets down to just 10 to 15 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions needing offsetting by 2050 from around 40 megatons today, and allowing for 50% growth in aviation. But achieving this relies on efficiency improvements of 2% per annum year on year and the use of 40 to 50% SAF by 2050. These are recognised as really stretching technology goals. Both the approaches, the CCC and the government, have core scenarios that approximately halve emissions and use about 25 to 30% SAF by 2050. But the government scenario allows for 50% growth and CCC only 25. Why? The government scenario assumes 2% year-on-year efficiency improvement. The CCC sticks with a more conservative historic level of about 1.4%. All of the scenarios, of course, include the exciting developments of zero-carbon aviation with batteries and with hydrogen, as the Minister has commented. But actually, by 2050, the impact of these is pretty small. These are really things that will impact in terms of emissions as we go beyond 2050. What these comparisons highlight, though, for getting to net zero in 2050 is, one, the critical role of efficiency improvement. And of course, secondly, the importance of SAF. But underlining again the importance of SAF just underlines again the importance of efficiency because of the additional costs associated with sustainable aviation fuel. But there is something else that I think we must consider, and that is the non-CO2 warming impacts of burning aviation fuel. The persistent contrails, the NOx, the impact of water vapour in the stratosphere. These have a greater impact than the CO2 effect, and we don't currently include them in our accounting. Both SAF and hydrogen potentially produce these effects, possibly to similar levels as current kerosene. And of course, they will increase with increased demand. But they can be reduced by increased efficiency. They can also be reduced by other things like attending to weather and when we fly. And anybody who wants to know more of that, can I send you to talk to the Met Office in the Science Pavilion next door, because they've done some really interesting work in this area. But we urgently need to understand these effects better, and we do need to include them in our assessment and essentially in our carbon reduction plans. So just let me conclude. As the Minister has said, aviation is a critical UK industry and one where we must remain a global leader. I know from my own experience as an engineer who's worked at Rolls-Royce the impact of the quality of engineering in a company like Rolls-Royce. It's an impact that spreads out across UK industry as people move around and technology diffuses to other sectors. Only yesterday I was introducing colleagues from the offshore wind industry to former colleagues in Rolls-Royce to discuss condition monitoring, where Rolls-Royce is an absolute leader and the energy industry has an enormous amount to learn. Meeting net zero can strengthen our global leadership, and sustainable aviation fuels will clearly be important, but we must gain a better understanding of non-CO2 effects. Electric and hydrogen flight are exciting, and they will have growing importance, particularly for the longer term. But my final point is that our analysis shows that we need a ruthless focus on efficiency improvement. Efficiency improvement is the way we will avoid the need for demand reduction in 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baroness Brown. Much appreciate those contributions. So, as the Minister said earlier, I'm Emma Gilthorpe and I'm the Chief Executive of the Jet Zero Council, and I also happen to be the Chief Operating Officer of Heathrow Airport as well. We've got a fantastic panel with us today, and I'm just going to get them to briefly introduce themselves. So,
good morning everybody. Jonathan Council, Group Head of Sustainability at IAG, but also I'm on the Sustainable Aviation Council. I'm the sponsor for the Cleaner Working Group, and also I work with Emma on the Jet Zero Council.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Val Miftakov, CEO and founder Zero Avia, and we're building the hydrogen electric engines for commercial aircraft, and we're also on the Jet Zero Council.
Jennifer Holmgren, CEO of Lanza Tech, Chairman of Lanza Jet, and honored to be on the Jet Zero Council, on the SMI, and have the opportunity to refine CO2 to make aviation fuel.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And of course, you've met Minister Court, so I'm sure many of you know very well. So, Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. We heard from Baroness Brown, amongst other things, her focus on SAF and how important that's going to be to our transition. Obviously, Lanztech, focusing on carbon capture and how you translate that into fuels. What do you need to translate this ambition into action?
So I thank you for that. First, it's obvious we need public-private partnerships. That's why we're here. So that's key. But I would say there's two really important factors. One is if you want to make sure that we get as many opportunities and many shots on goal, we need technology-neutral legislation so that every new approach that's not been imagined yet has a seat at the table, an equal seat at the table. That's the first thing. We can't let government legislation be a blocker to new ideas. The second thing is if you want to build first of a kind, we need to find creative financing mechanisms that allow you to build a demonstration scale and a first commercial. There's enough risks associated with those first that it's very difficult to use conventional financing. So that is extremely important. And then I said two, but I'll go with three. The last one, of course, is we need long-term offtake agreements. But if it really is for first of a kind, those can't just be long-term offtake agreements. Often we've seen prepaid offtake agreements and other approaches that allow putting steel in the ground.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Now, Val, you're coming at the decarbonisation of aviation from a very different perspective. You're looking at zero-emission flight. Can you talk us through, it sometimes feels like this is a long way away, when we talk about SAF being something that's here and now and drop in, but technology feels like it's a long distance deliverable. But can you talk us through how you're getting on and what your milestones are?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Emma. So we, of course, believe that the answer for zero-emission or net zero aviation is a combination of the solutions, and SAF is definitely a big part of the solution. This is the only thing that really works for the industry today. But we also think that zero-emission solutions, novel propulsion solutions, are very important. And we at Zero Avia, we are taking the hydrogen electric approach, so hydrogen on board the aircraft, fuel cells convert to electricity, electric motors driving the propulsors. It was good to hear Baroness Brown saying things about the importance of the efficiency. Hydrogen fuel cell approach is much more efficient generally than combustion of a similar engine size. So 50-60% efficient versus 25-30% efficient. And that's how we get better utilization of chemical energy. So on our side, the company is relatively young, a little over 4 years, but we have already flown a number of prototypes, about to fly the 20-seat prototype in the next 2 months in our Cotswold Airport, beautiful Cotswold facility. We've been supported by the UK government, ATI, Aerospace Technology Institute and BAE, so that was great. We're looking to commercially launch our power plants as early as 2024, so in 3 years, in the 20-seat aircraft size. And we actually just announced the partnership with several manufacturers of aircraft and several major airlines to take up those engines and fly in those fleets. Over 500 engines were committed just in the last 3-4 weeks. So the first launch is 2024. And then the second segment that we're targeting is large turboprops, so 70, 80 seat aircraft. And initial launch of those is 2026, 2027. We got a launch partner for one of those already, Alaska Airlines, which is number 5 airline in the United States. So really, we see the technology starting to play within this decade. Of course, it's not going to be a major part of the emission reduction for this decade, but we think it can start making a real dent in the next decade and definitely by 2050. But again, the larger aircraft, the twin aisle aircraft, probably even 2040 will be only on SAF. And we'll work as hard as we can to bring novel technology there, but there are some real challenges.
Thanks very much, Val. So let's move on to talk a bit about policy. Now, you know, Minister Courts, you were talking a lot about the progress that we've made in the UK, the Jet Zero strategy being announced. You know, we've been consulting on mandates, but inherently aviation is global. So what is it that government can do to drive that change on the international and the intergovernmental level?
Thanks, Emma, and that's absolutely right. I mean, this is emissions in any event, and climate is a global issue and needs a global response anyway, and that's particularly the case when you're dealing with aviation, which obviously by its nature is a global industry. In one word, it's leadership. And that's what the UK sets out to provide. And you can see the example of how we've achieved that in things like the CORSIA scheme, which is the emissions trading scheme. Now, that has a part to play, but it's not the whole solution. And what we need to be doing is working with our key ambitious partners, countries who share our level of vision and ambition, through particularly ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. Because it's through that, and they've got a General Assembly coming up in 2022, where we will be driving for greater ambition for aviation and relying upon the leadership role that we have and the steps we've taken. That's part of the reason why the Jet Zero Council is so important. Not just because it shows what we want to do domestically as a country, but it shows other countries how we can all go about doing this internationally. So ICAO, international leadership is the key for them.
Thank you very much. And I think it was great to see IATA as well make their policy choice to back that 2050 ambition. I felt like that was a bit of a waypoint on the journey to ICAO. And of course, we also hope we'll hear some good stuff out of COP in the next few days, which will also just build on that momentum and just give us that sort of inexorable pressure to make that call. Jonathan, so airline, your perspective from a policy point of view, what do you need?
Yeah, no, thank you, Emma. And just building on what Robert was saying, I mean, we are a global industry. We need global policy. And the two elements that we need are carbon pricing and policy on SAF. So we agree with you, Jennifer. You know, carbon pricing, it's technology neutral. It'll incentivize all low carbon solutions. And as Robert says, we made a great first step as an industry with the CORSIA agreement back in 2016. It's still the only global sectoral mechanism to address climate change, but we need to build on it. We recognize there's a compromise to get all the developing countries in. We've got the ICAO General Assembly next year. We need to strengthen CORSIA. Particularly, it needs to cover all emissions, because currently it only covers growth over a baseline. We need to make sure only the most robust carbon credits are eligible for CORSIA. And eventually, we need it to also include greenhouse gas removal technology, so transitioning away from offsets into direct carbon capture. So they're the things we're looking for. And the good news is we've got the International Aviation Climate Ambition Coalition. I think there'll be an announcement this afternoon here talking about that, and with that very motivation to drive that. The other piece, sustainable aviation fuels, an amazing thing we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is the convergence around recognition of the critical role that SAF is going to play in helping us meet our targets. And again, we need ambition through ICAO to drive global supply of SAF. We believe with the right policies in place, we can get to 10% by 2030. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but that is 300 plants. That's 30 million tons of CO2. It's 400 times more than the stuff we have today, but it will require 250 billion of investment. But we think with the right ambition through the Jet Zero Council, building what we're doing here, and at ICAO, we can get that investment. And of course, 10% is only the first step in the journey. We believe we can get to 20% by 2035, 30% by 2040, and then at least 50% by 2050.
Brilliant, thanks, Jonathan. And I hope you don't mind me asking, you've been in this space from an industry perspective for quite a long time. And I've only been sort of playing at this for a few short years, but do you feel the momentum building, or do you feel there's real substance in what's happening in the market at the moment?
Absolutely. I would. So I've been working on SAF for about 13 years, and it was a lonely space in the first 2 or 3 years. People thought we were crazy, especially when we were talking about turning household waste into jet fuel. People wondered what we were smoking at the time. But now, as I say, generally I'd say the majority of the industry are behind recognizing that not only is SAF the real opportunity for the next 10 years, but for medium and long haul flying, which is going to be 70% of our emissions in 2050, it's sustainable aviation fuels. So yeah, it's really encouraging the progress we've seen there.
So there's lots of debate that we have around the Jet Zero Council, and when we were first sort of going through that sort of storming process, there was quite a bit of, we need SAF. No, we need the technology. And I think we've all wholesomely and fulsomely concluded that we absolutely need all of the above if we're going to get to 2030 and 2050. Minister, did you want to add something in there?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to just build on that point that you've made about needing all of these. And the Jet Zero consultation, it's very clear there's a staging between the three of them. And the three stages that you have, you start off with efficiencies. And I just wanted to just emphasize that point about efficiencies that Baroness Brown made. Because often people, when they think about sustainable aviation, they immediately jump to thinking straight away about the futuristic aircraft types that we see on the screens around us, for example. And those are hard in development, going very fast, thanks to the work of Val and people like him. But that doesn't mean that you have to wait for all of that. There's a huge amount that can be done now. So, the aircraft that we see operating out of places like Heathrow may look the same as the aircraft that were operating 20 or 30 years ago, but they're not. They've got vastly more efficient engines. They're made out of carbon fiber. So they're approximately speaking twice as efficient and half as polluting as those that were flying around 20 or 30 years ago, although they look the same. And then when you look at things like, I was down at Bristol the other day seeing the trial they're doing with EasyJet on electronic baggage handling, electronic pushback, all of that kind of thing. That is all cutting emissions now through efficiencies and technology that is available now. That helps. It's not enough, but it helps. Then you've got the second stage, which is really where we get into SAF, which is what's critically important, particularly for long haul over the course of the medium term. And then in the longer term, with all of those steps already taken, that's where we'll be seeing some of the longer term futuristic aircraft types, all the things that are working on. But, as Val's saying, I saw the first flight of Val's Zero Avia aircraft a year ago. He's now talking about, is instead of a Piper, it's now going to be a 20-seat Dornier within the next couple of months in the space of a year. It's extraordinary progress. So lots more to do. This is very exciting times. But the staging, I'm very keen that everyone understands.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And I just add to that, from a policy perspective, something that doesn't get talked about quite as much. We talk more, actually, at the Jet Zero Council about the incremental technological change that's happened over the last sort of 10, 15, even 20 years and the improvements that have come from that. But airspace is something that we don't tend to talk about as much. Something very dear to my heart at Heathrow, if you've ever sat in a stack above those two runways. But it is a critical part of this, and something that you might think is just sort of UK-centric. But of course, UK airspace interacts with European airspace, and making the most of that airspace and delivering as efficient flight paths that are point to point, using the least amount of fuel and hopefully the least amount of noise in the process as well is also a critical part of that. And just, Jennifer, just on the policy side, you made a really vital point, and something I hear coming through time and time again from council members about creating the investability in all of this. Is there something specific? You were talking about first-of-a-kind plants and the SAF plants and the challenge you have in overcoming that initial hurdle with investors where they go, oh, this all looks a bit novel, feels a bit uncomfortable, don't recognise it. Is there something more from a policy perspective beyond what you've already seen coming through that would help kind of normalise that investment choice?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that the DFT has done a tremendous job in supporting new ideas. They're helping not just lab ideas, but scaling to demos and scaling to first commercials. That's why we're building in the UK our first commercial plan, right? And it's because of the support that we've gotten. And so the government piece is really important. What I kind of alluded to earlier too was in the first of a kind, it's not enough to just have offtake agreements. You know, we tend to have prepaid offtake agreements. That really helps. And I think government, in addition, can do one more thing, and that's you know, loan guarantees, because banks get really queasy about first of a kind, and if there's a guarantee backed by the government, that really helps. I know I'm sitting next to a politician, and so I have the right to be political and skew the question somewhere else, right? And so I'm going to take it to Baroness Brown, and I think she just left, but I'll do it
she
anyways.
left, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, she knew it was coming. No, I want to point out that this sustainable aviation fuels that are being flown today are synthetic paraffinic kerosenes, which do not have aromatics, which means you get less particulate emissions, less contrails, less NOx. And I want to highlight that because if we don't count all the externalities and all the value, the pricing of SAF is not actually reflecting the value that it brings. And I like to think of SAF as an upgrading blending component. And I'm sorry to jump away from that, but I did want to make that point because she did give us the opportunity to address it.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And Val, just sort of, again, further building on, you know, policy comes hand in hand with regulation. Clearly, when it comes to flying novel aircraft, there are certification issues around safety. How are you finding that? And actually, how does the UK compare in your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And we have an interesting perspective because we've flown aircraft, test aircraft in both the United States and the UK, and the FAA lands and Civil Aviation Authority. And there are significant differences, of course. We find that CAA is very, very supportive of what we do on the zero emission propulsion, on the novel propulsion side. We're working with the CAA as part of the government supported projects. They're allocating the resources. They really want to do it, but I think we can do more, and we need to do more on making sure that there is right resourcing in the regulator on these new technologies. Because you do want to have at the regulator the groups that are knowledgeable about the new technology, about the electrified propulsion, about the fuel cells, about some other technology areas, so that you can move the ball faster to the certification. And then once you have, of course, certificate technology and the certified technology, that's when you get to the policies around, okay, now how do we get the fleets converted? And for the operator, like British Airways and others, it's important where you have the fleets that are, let's say, in half of their useful life. And if you can do the engine adaptations, how are we going to finance that? So there's a lot of capital investment. So somehow we need to do that. And then on the operating side, Jennifer mentioned, the importance of the right metric is paramount. And of course, there are advantages of the SAF in the non-CO2 space. There are advantages of battery electric in non-CO2 space, hydrogen electric, and so forth. And we need to really calculate the right metrics and put the level playing field across that metric so that these technologies can flourish.
Thanks very much, Val. So aviation is talked about frequently as being the sort of hardest to decarbonise sector. And so we know this is really complicated, right? So what I want to ask the panel is, from your point of view, and there's a rule here, right? I'm going to ask you your view on what's hardest, but you've also got to front up a solution, okay? So I'm going to start with Jonathan. From your perspective, what do you think is going to be the hardest thing when it comes to decarbonising? And I look forward to what your answer is to that as well.
Yeah, indeed. And it is, and I sort of think as an industry, we are moving to the very exciting phase because we can see technologies that are going to become implemented. So I think the last 4 or 5 years, I classify that as the commitment phase. So it's agreeing all the targets and culminating, as you say, in the IATA commitment just a month ago, and we hope that we can get ICAO there next year. But now we've got to move into the delivery phase. So I think the 2020s absolutely has to be delivery of low carbon solutions. And for me, the hydrogen-powered aircraft and hybrid electric, really exciting, probably going to make a bigger impact in the 2030s and 2040s. So really, in the 2020s, it's about sustainable aviation fuels. And I think I'm not normally one to promote billionaires' books, but Bill Gates' How to Avoid a Climate Crisis is really smart on this, because he identifies, energy transitions take 60 years. If you look at coal to oil to gas, and that's what we're trying to do. The movement to SAF, it's an energy transition, but we're trying to do it in 20 years. So that's the challenge that we've got. Now, I think we have made great progress in the UK with Jet Zero Council. We think 10%, that's 14 plants in the UK, but it's going to take $10 billion of investment. And to get that investment, to get those investors to put that cash into these projects, we need policy support. So the mandate, I think that's really important, but it's not sufficient. Additional to that, we need the price stability mechanism. And I think if we get that, that will unlock that $10 billion to get those first 14 plants by 2030. So.
Val, what do you think? What's hardest and what's your answer?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, a couple of things. One is to just echo the comments here. We think that it's really critical to have a stable and long-term policy environment that is also global. Part of the stability is also having it global. So when we have things, and again, we have experience in the U.S. when things change every 4 years, basically, and that's not very conducive to driving innovation and maintaining the momentum. So we need that stable environment. We need the right metrics. I talked about it a little bit. And the second bit is, over longer term, we will have the new technology solutions. And pushing those new technology solutions, and maybe over a 50, 60-year period, as you mentioned on the energy transitions, pushing those solutions will have resistance, and we will need to be conscious of that, of the incumbent technologies, of the resistance of the markets, and make sure that these stable policy environments really address that.
Jennifer?
I want to take us a step back to the problem we're trying to solve, which is not going to be solved by just solving aviation. And I want us to remember that 30% of the carbon that we use today ends up in the things we use, our clothes, our carpet fiber. And I want us to remember that if we really want a transition, we need to learn how to make all of that outside of the fossil fuel chain. So I'll start with that, and I think private government partnerships will help us do that, but we just need to keep it in perspective. And I think the second thing we need to keep in perspective is that success is the coalition of the willing, everybody, not the people in this room, but the people outside and everywhere else who are fighting for the social and environmental justice we need. It's a deviation from aviation, but aviation is just part of the story. And to me, if we don't solve the overall problem, then aviation, is going to have a hard time with its license to operate, because as much as we all love aviation, it's a pretty visible stick. So we just got to get this done, and this decade is really important. So we got to throw everything at the wall and make sure that some of the things can grow and make a difference.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Minister, what's your perspective? I mean, you hear industry talking a lot about what government can do, but what's your view on what's hardest?
So if you'll permit me to give two, because I think you're going to do justice to the question. The first of those is around making sure that we show that there is a real solution to this, and then we deliver it. And that is the only way to do that is through the partnership that we've seen already. You're quite right. It's not just government. Government's here to provide the regulatory framework, to provide the ambition, to provide the incentives. But ultimately, we've got to work, absolutely hand in glove with industry and with academia to make this happen. The market will, and the technological impulse is what will provide the solution here. So that's the critical part of it. The second answer, if I can be permitted to give that second answer, is international working. because it's all very well the UK decarbonising and the aviation industry in the UK decarbonising, but everyone else has to too. Not just because if we do it alone it'll be ineffective, but because when the hydrogen electric aircraft or the hydrogen aircraft that Val is producing, they've got to have somewhere to fly to. Well, at the other end they've got to refuel and then they've got to come back again. So all of that wider infrastructure at airports has to take place worldwide, not just here. And that's why the question that you started off asking me about what we're doing on a policy level internationally, and my answer about ICAO, is so critically important.
Thanks very much, Minister. So I absolutely support that point about infrastructure at airports. I think when I look at, we've had a very stable fueling infrastructure at the airport for some time, and we introduced quite a lot of EV charging a few years ago. But even now, sort of getting consistent provision in the right place for the scaling up of electric vehicles, for example, is no simple task. And of course, we don't currently provide petrol for cars when people drive to the airport. But of course, we're going to need to provide electric provision when they come, and particularly if they're sort of parking in long stay and things like that. But when I think forward to, okay, so we're going to need SAF, or we might have different types of SAF, and then we're going to need electric charging for planes, we're going to need hydrogen and maybe different types of hydrogen. And then I look at the very tight footprint of my airport and the sort of geographic area I've got to play with, and of course all of the safety issues that go along with that. We're currently going through the process of working out how you get electric vehicles with batteries through tunnels, for example, which hasn't been worked through in terms of, we know how to do it from a petrol or diesel engine vehicle point of view going through tunnels at the airport, but we haven't had to deal with EVs and buses and things like that. So, and we've got aging technology and there's some complexity in that. So, yeah, quite a lot to do, and definitely need a kind of 20-year master plan for how we're going to get there to make sure the airport's evolving at the pace that airlines, fuel producers, innovators need us to. So I just want to draw things to a close, really, and just kind of sum up what we've heard from the people that have spoken to us today. And I think the sort of headlines that come across, the first thing I want to do is really bring us back to, it's easy when we're all sitting here in a room listening to each other, as Jennifer says, many of us will be from the aviation sector, to think, pat ourselves on the back a little bit. But we know this is really, really hard. We also know we've made some really solid progress, and I've certainly seen more progress in the last 18 months than I'd seen in the prior 5 years, which is brilliant. But we absolutely need to fix this problem, because otherwise aviation will be the first casualty of climate change. We already hear a lot of talk about the sort of guilt that goes along with flying, and things like CORSIA and offering our consumers offsetting is going a long way to solving that in the moment problem. But if we can't set a really clear path for how we are going to make this transition, and to the Minister's point, to do that really visibly, we need to show people physically, tangibly, how we're going to do that, because there's a huge credibility point that goes along with this. And we also need to make sure that we bring our investors with us, because if Val and Jennifer and all of the businesses like them can't get investors, and this is a global competition for that investment, if we can't create the right environment for them to invest, then that capital will go elsewhere, and it will be great because it may transition energy rather than aviation, but we need to fix aviation in this room. So we've made great strides, but we really need to keep up the momentum now. And I think we do that, absolutely. This is going to take teamwork. I think there's been a huge step forward in the last year about not everybody sort of pointing to government and saying you need to do something, or indeed government pointing to industry and say get on with it. There's very much an understanding that we're going to do this together if it's going to happen. Well, not if, it will happen because we do it. We do it together. We also need to hold each other to account, make sure we're not just believing the hype, and that we are making sure that we're seeing real and tangible progress. But we absolutely just need to commit now and be really ambitious collectively about how we're going to get there. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you again to Sustainable Aviation for making this happen. Thank you to Jonathan, to Val, to Jennifer and Minister Courts, and thank you also to the audience. Thank you very much.